am a shark conservation biologist. I work at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada, and I'm going to talk to you this morning about sharks and ocean conservation and marine biology. I have a little bit of content prepared for you, and then most of the time I would like to be spending answering any questions that you may have about sharks, about the ocean, about marine biology, or a career in science or anything like that. And I believe the way to do that is to ask questions through the text box, which on my screen is in the lower left. You can ask those sort of throughout, and I'll read them once I finish speaking. But yeah, so I work on sharks. I've loved sharks since before I was younger than most of the people watching here. My parents have pictures of me when I could barely walk with shark toys and shark t-shirts and things like that. I've always been fascinated by them. They're an incredibly powerful animal. They're an incredibly interesting and different animal. And their recent research has shown that they're actually very, very, very important to a healthy, functioning ocean. So I want to tell you a little bit about some cool things about sharks, and then get into a bit of the science and conservation angle. But there are a lot of people know some shark species. A lot of people are familiar. Oh, my sound is not working. That thingy is a text box is saying. Are other people able to hear me? I'll stop here in case we need to start over. Sounds great for some others. Okay, it seems like the issue may be on Glenbrook's end. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, it seems like it's working for most groups. Technology is always great until it isn't. So anyway, sharks are a much more diverse group of animals than a lot of people think. A lot of people are familiar with the great white shark, which is the star of Shark Week and Jaws and things like that. And a lot of people know bull sharks and tiger sharks and hammerhead sharks and species like that, the more famous sharks. But there are more than 500 species of sharks and another 1,000 or so species of shark relatives. Shark relatives are the skates, the rays, and the chimeras. And what separates that group from other fish that you may know of, something like a tuna or a bass or a swordfish, is their skeleton. That's the main difference. So if I could have everyone who's watching do a quick demonstration with me, hold out your arm, pick a point about halfway between your wrist and your elbow, about here, and try to bend your arm there. Don't try too hard. Hopefully, you should find that your arm does not bend. That's bone. That's a skeleton made of bone. Next, crinkle your nose. Crinkle your ears. You should find that that's much more flexible. If you are able to bend your arm there and you're not able to crinkle or your nose or ear, you should perhaps seek medical attention. But that's cartilage. Sharks and their relatives, their entire skeleton is made out of cartilage, whereas other groups of fishes their skeletons made out of bone. Cartilage is much more flexible, it's much lighter, and it heals faster. So it has a lot of advantages for sharks and their relatives. Again, there are more than 500 species of sharks, and there are 1,000 more of their relatives. And they range in just about every habitat where there's water. Some live in coral reefs, some live in rivers, some live under Arctic ice, some live in the deepest part of the ocean where sunlight never reaches. And because of that, they're able to glow in the dark so that they can find each other and attract food. Some of those sharks are called lantern sharks because they glow in the dark. There is a species of shark that lives in the deep ocean that is bubblegum pink in color. That's the goblin shark. The smallest shark in the ocean is the dwarf lantern shark. It's about that big. And the biggest shark in the ocean is the whale shark. It's the size of a school bus. So they have just an enormous diversity of sizes and shapes and colors and behaviors and habitats. But when most people think about sharks, what they think about is sharks biting humans. Particularly where I used to live in Florida, that was on the news all the time. But a shark biting a human is actually a really, really, really rare occurrence, and it's just not something that you need to worry about if you're taking basic safety precautions. In a typical year in the United States, about 4.5 million people die from heart attacks. No, that's not. 450,000 people die from heart attack. I need to look up these numbers. I'm sorry. You are much, much, much more likely to die from a heart attack than to be bitten by a shark. You are much, much more likely to die in a car accident than to be bitten by a shark. You are even more likely to die being struck by lightning than bitten by a shark. More people die in the United States in a typical year from flower pots falling on their heads from above than are killed by sharks. More people in the United States in a typical year die in lawnmower accidents than are killed by sharks. More people in the world in a year die falling off cliffs while not paying attention while trying to take selfies with dramatic nature backgrounds than are killed by sharks. But whenever a shark bites someone anywhere in the world, it's headline news everywhere in the world. So this perpetuates this misunderstanding that sharks are really dangerous, and there are some people that are afraid to go in the ocean because of sharks. It's when sharks don't bite you, it's not because they don't know you're there. I've never been to the beach and not seen a shark. Every time I go to the beach, I see sharks. Most people just aren't really looking for them, and they just don't really bother you. There are some basic precautions you can take. Stay pretty close to shore, stay with a group of people, don't swim near the mouths of rivers. There's some myths about this. Some people say if you see dolphins, it means there aren't sharks there. That's just not true. Dolphins and sharks eat the same food, so they're often found in the exact same spot at the same time. But in general, sharks just aren't something that you need to worry about. And I'll remind folks here that after I'm done with this presentation, this quick presentation, I will be taking questions the rest of the time. So if teachers want to be collecting questions from students and typing them in at the text box at the bottom there, so I can have a backlog ready, that'd be great. So yeah, sharks aren't a threat to people, but they are in fact very, very important for a healthy functioning ocean ecosystem. And the reason for that is, or there are a few reasons for that. Predators are always important at keeping a food chain in balance. If you lose the top of the food chain, the whole food chain can unravel. And an example of that comes from where I used to live outside Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. We used to have wolves there, but people killed all the wolves because wolves are scary and bad, and who wants wolves in your town? Well, what happened is now there's too many deer because there aren't wolves to keep deer populations in check. And the deer populations are out of control, and they're malnourished because there's not enough food for all of them, and they carry diseases like Lyme disease, which are bad for humans, and they cause enormous amounts of property damage when they leave the forest in search of food. The same type of thing can happen in the ocean when you lose predators. Sharks are also have been the subject of a really cool area of scientific research that is called fear ecology. Fear ecology is basically the study of how the mere presence of a predator influences the behavior of prey. So without sharks even biting or even trying to eat prey animals, they can still have a huge influence on the ecosystem. And they do that by basically scaring prey. Prey animals know maybe there's great food over here, but there's also predators over there. So maybe I won't go eat that great food. And that can happen on just an enormous scale. And because of that, it can have major impacts on the whole food web. When herbivores choose not to forage in a seagrass bed or in a kelp forest or whatever the case may be, that seagrass bed can grow bigger and stronger itself and become habitat for lots and lots of other animals. So sharks are really important, but sharks are in trouble. 24% of all known species of sharks and their relatives, almost 1 in 4, is considered threatened with extinction by the IUCN Red List. And the biggest threat facing sharks as a group is overfishing, unsustainable fishing. That means humans are just killing too many sharks. And we're doing it to provide shark fins, which are used to make a delicacy called shark fin soup. We're doing it to provide shark meat, which is just eaten directly. And there are sustainable, well-managed shark fisheries. I don't ever recommend that people go out of their way to eat shark, but there are absolutely sustainable, well-managed shark fisheries. But many shark fisheries in the world today are very, very unsustainable. And the reason for that is sharks don't reproduce the same way that other species of fish do. Something like a tuna or a salmon or a mahi-mahi, they reproduce by what's called spawning. And the specific details of that you can ask your teachers about, but basically it means they can have a lot more babies a lot faster. The sharks, on the other hand, have internal fertilization, and they will either lay eggs or give live birth like mammals do, depending on the species of shark. What that means is they cannot have as many babies in a year so you cannot fish as many of them in a year because the population just won't recover. Question from Kenyon. No, I don't have any slides. So sharks are in trouble because of overfishing. Climate change is a threat facing some shark species, but in general, not very many. Pollution and habitat destruction are threats facing some shark species, but in general, not very many. Overfishing is the biggest threat facing sharks, which means that there's a lot that you can do to help sharks. You can make sure that you're only eating sustainable seafood, and make sure that you're only ordering sustainable seafood when you go out to dinner or at the grocery store or things like that. That can have a huge impact on shark conservation. And there are absolutely ways that people can help. There are a lot of great shark conservation charities out there that many of them could make a huge difference if they only had a little bit more money or if they only had a little bit more volunteer work. So a great thing for people to do that can make a big difference is to find a local scientific organization or find a local conservation organization that does good work and reach out to them and say, hey, I want to help. What can I do? And most of the time, they'll have something for you to do. I will warn you that there are a lot of not particularly reputable charities out there, and I'm always happy to answer questions if teachers have questions. Is this a good group for us to be working with? On my social media accounts, which are Why Sharks Matter, all one word, I have a Facebook page, an Instagram, and a Twitter. I regularly share ways that people can help sharks and can help the ocean, things like that. Another good thing that you can do or other good things you can do in general to help the ocean, if not sharks specifically, is use less plastic. Single-use plastic is often a big problem in some ocean ecosystems. It's a big problem for sea turtles. Specifically, they eat jellyfish, and in the ocean, a plastic bag that's dissolving a little looks a lot like a jellyfish. Plastic pollution is not a big problem for sharks, but it is a big problem for other parts of the ocean. So using less plastic whenever you can is a big thing you can do to help. I don't necessarily support banning all plastic because there are some legitimate uses for it, but there are some silly uses for it that most people can cut out without affecting their lives in a significant way. Also, just reducing your carbon footprint in general. It's important for stopping climate change, which affects the ocean through what's called ocean acidification, as well as warming the ocean. That's not a problem for shark species, for most shark species, but it is for some, and it is an issue for the ocean in general. So those are things that you can do to help. I want to tell you just a little bit about my career and how I got here in case anyone watching is considering becoming a marine biologist. I know I had already decided I wanted to do this when I was most of your guys' age. And it's okay if you don't know what you want to do yet. It's okay if you don't know what you want to do yet by the time you get to college. But in case anyone is considering this career, I want to tell you just a little bit about how I got here. Right now, I am called what's called a postdoc. So I'm not yet a professor at a university, but I finished graduate school. So I have my PhD, and I'm sort of apprenticed under a more senior professor to learn a little bit more before I can become a professor. But to get here, I went to college and I studied biology and marine biology in college. I got a master's degree in marine biology, and then I got a PhD in environmental science and policy before coming here. And things to look for in a college. I know we have some high school students, but some that are much younger, so I'll be quick here. It's something that's, you don't need to necessarily go to the best school in the world in order to become whatever you want to do. But for the sciences in general, if you're considering a career as a scientist, a really important thing to look for is a university that lets students do their own research. That is more important than any class that you'll take. And yeah, I'm American, but temporarily living in Canada. Pretty nice here today. But it's been cold a little bit for some of the last week, particularly since I moved here from Miami, Florida, which is a lot warmer than Canada. The dog has been not impressed with the cold. That's about all that I was hoping to say to you guys for a little bit of background about what I do. I see some questions are starting to come in here, and I am happy to continue to take more questions. Just again, teachers, if you could solicit questions from your students and then type them in the text box there. I have a question from Alicia. What is the fastest swimming shark? The fastest swimming shark is also, I think, the fastest swimming of any fish, though there might be a tuna or something that's faster. And that's the short-fin mako shark. And they can swim about 45 miles an hour for a pretty long period of time. That's not just a burst acceleration. Some of you may have seen that Shark Week a couple years ago, they had Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympic human swimmer of all time, try to virtually race various species of shark to see if he could beat them. Not even close. There's no human in the world that can swim faster than some of the slowest swimming sharks in the world. And there was just no way that Michael Phelps had any chance at all outswimming a shark. And it was perhaps presented a little misleadingly, but that show did teach people a lot of things about shark swimming abilities. I have a question here from Chapin about shark bycatch. Shark bycatch. So for those of you who don't know what bycatch is, that's when you go fishing and you're trying to catch one kind of fish, but you also catch other fish that are near that kind of fish. So they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They weren't what you were trying to catch. And that is largely unavoidable with modern commercial fishing gear. If any of you have ever gone fishing with your friends or family, you usually use a rod and reel. There's one hook with a piece of bait on it. You catch one thing at a time. If it's not what you want, you can just throw it back. That's not often possible with the scale of gear that modern commercial fishing vessels use. That can be miles long. They have nets that are miles long. They'll catch tens of thousands of fish at a time and not just the species that they're trying to catch. They have something that's called a long line. A long line is a stretch of rope that floats at the surface that has hooks coming off of it. And it might have 50 or 100,000 hooks coming off of it. It's not just one hook at a time. So you're going to catch lots of things. And yes, shark bycatch is a big problem. Often when you're trying to catch tuna or swordfish, you will accidentally catch shark because they're found in the same open ocean environment and they eat the same type of food. So that can be a big issue for sure. There are some cool ways that people are trying to reduce shark bycatch. One of them relies on this amazing extra sense that sharks have that other fish don't usually have. Sharks and rays have the ability to sense electric fields and magnetic fields. We can't do that. So they use this often to find prey that's buried under the sand. Hammerhead sharks in particular, the reason they have that hammerhead is it's extra surface area for the electrosense system. They sweep it across the sand like if you've ever been to the beach and seen people using metal detectors across the sand, basically the same principle. And even if a prey animal is hidden under the sand so you can't see it or hear it or smell it, sharks know they're there because they can sense the electric field given off by its beating heart, which I think is just awesome. And sharks also use that electrosense to navigate in the open ocean. They can the Earth's magnetic field they can navigate based off of, which is I think super cool. But to reduce shark bycatch, some people have started attaching these special magnets to the hooks that go on long lines. Excuse me. And the hooks will give off a little magnetic field. So if a shark goes to bite the hook, it will sense that magnetic field and just swim away and be a little annoyed by it. But a tuna or a swordfish cannot tell that there's a magnetic field there and will just bite on it. So that, in some cases, that's been shown to reduce bycatch. In some cases, all you need to do is use different baits. There's some baits that a tuna or a swordfish will love that a shark won't. But yes, shark bycatch is absolutely a problem. There is another question from Chapin. Is it true that baby sharks eat each other in the womb? Sometimes. There are some species of sharks that absolutely do that. Sand tiger sharks. If you've ever been to an aquarium and you've seen a very slow-moving shark just sort of hovering in the water column with nasty-looking jagged teeth, that's a sand tiger shark. So in other parts of the world, they call that same species a gray nurse shark or a ragged tooth. I actually like ragged tooth the best. That would be in South Africa, they call them that, but it's the same species. Yeah, they will have several siblings growing up in the womb at the same time, but only one of them will actually be born because it will eat all the others, which is, it's called intrauterine cannibalism or ovophagy, which is a really neat thing. And there was just for the first time ultrasound footage. It's an ultrasound that you can use to tell if a shark is pregnant. It's basically the same technology that we use on humans to look at the picture of a baby growing up inside the mother. But using an ultrasound, they were able to actually document a shark embryo swimming from one uterus to another uterus to continue eating siblings, which is just bonkers. So yeah, some sharks lay eggs, some sharks give live birth, some sharks can actually clone themselves. They discovered that at an aquarium in Nebraska, which, as those of you familiar with U.S. geography know, Nebraska is pretty darn far from the ocean in any direction. And they had an aquarium there that had a bunch of female bonnethead sharks in it. And they had had a bunch of female bonnethead sharks in that aquarium for years. And then one morning, people came to work, and there were a bunch of baby sharks swimming around in there. And there were no males, so they had no idea how this could have possibly happened. So they did genetic testing, and they found that all of the babies were exact genetic replicas of one of the mothers. That mother had cloned herself. And then we see that, we've since seen that at a bunch of other species of sharks, usually in aquariums, though it has been documented once in the wild. That, yeah, if you can't find a mate and you want to make sure that your genetic line gets passed on, just do it yourself. I'm going to scroll down here. It looks like some more questions are coming in. How long have sharks been alive? From Nicole. That's a great question. There have been sharks swimming, animals recognizable as sharks swimming in the ocean for over 450 million years. That is a lot longer, or that is a lot before there were dinosaurs on land. That's before there were even trees on land. Sharks are older than trees. And there are a lot of species of sharks that we used to have that we don't have anymore. One of which I have to mention here is Megalodon. Megalodon is definitely extinct. There is no doubt about that. Anyone claiming that Megalodon is not extinct is lying to you. But if you've ever, and for those of you who don't know what that is, if you've ever been to an aquarium or a science museum and you've seen the huge shark jaws that you have to stand like this to touch the top, that's Megalodon. They are definitely extinct. But yeah, sharks have been around longer than there have been trees, longer than there have been dinosaurs. And in the last 50 years or so, humans have given them some of their greatest threats in that entire history because of overfishing. A question from Meredith. Am I familiar with the Baby Sharks song? I sure am. And in fact, that song is not new. We were singing that song when I went to camp 30 years ago. But the new version of it by Pinkfong has, for some reason, gone quite viral. And I heard it just made it to the Billboard Top 100 list, which is insane for a song like that. But yeah, that song is actually not entirely accurate. And there's some interesting shark biology you can learn from what's wrong with that song. So if there's anyone in the universe who hasn't seen the Baby Shark song yet, it's a series of hand gestures and then bigger hand gestures and then bigger hand gestures as you move through baby shark, mama shark, grandma shark, etc. So the interesting thing about sharks is the females are larger than the males, and also sharks keep growing their entire lives. Humans stop growing at a certain point. Many other animals stop growing at a certain point. Fish don't. Fish will keep growing until they die. So What that means is the biggest shark would not be the daddy shark. The biggest shark would be the grandma shark, because the lady sharks are bigger than the males, and older sharks are bigger than younger sharks. So grandma shark would be the biggest, and then either mommy shark or grandpa shark. Daddy shark would be one of the smallest, with the mouth size there. But yes, I'm very familiar with the baby shark song. A question from EHS2T. How do sharks communicate? Generally, they don't. There's some body language. If you've ever seen an annoyed cat, they sort of arch their back and hiss at you. Sharks do basically the same thing. You would recognize when a shark is annoyed at you and trying to tell you. And they do that to each other also. But for the most part, there's not really communication between sharks. Another question from that same group. Where do sharks sleep? Sharks do not sleep. Many species of sharks need to keep swimming constantly in order to breathe. It pumps water over their gills, the act of swimming, which means if they ever stop swimming, they die. So other species of sharks are able to pump water over their gills while they're holding still, or they're able to sort of rest with a current pushing water over their gills. But sharks don't sleep. Sometimes they rest, sometimes they have periods that are more or less active, but they definitely don't sleep, which is weird. Can you imagine that? Other animals in the ocean, like dolphins, they're mammals, so they need to sleep like we do. But if you fall asleep in the ocean, you're gonna run into trouble. So what dolphins can do is they can turn off half of their brain at a time, so that that part of the brain is able to get rest, but the dolphin is still awake enough that it can avoid danger, which is really just a neat thing. That's I can't even imagine what that would feel like. Another question from that same group: can sharks smell blood from miles away? Not really. Sharks' sense of smell is legendary, and sharks can detect really, really, really low concentrations of blood or stress hormones. When a fish is stressed, it secretes certain chemicals. Humans do that too. That's why nervous sweat smells worse than exercise sweat sometimes. But when people say they can detect a drop of blood a mile away, that's not how smell works. Whenever you smell anything, you're smelling it because little particles of that something are physically touching the inside of your nose. So keep that in mind the next time you smell something gross. But yeah, sharks cannot smell blood from miles away, but they have a very, very strong sense of smell. For some species of sharks, more than a quarter of their entire brain is dedicated to a sense of smell. A question here: where was I when I first became interested in sharks? From Nicole L. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, pretty far from the ocean, though the other side of Pennsylvania does have access to the ocean in Philadelphia. But I have been interested in sharks as long as my family can remember. I feel like most kids go through a shark thing or a dinosaur thing or an outer space thing. I went through sharks and dinosaurs. Sharks I never grew out of. Dinosaurs I did. I've just always been interested in sharks. What I'm doing now is what I wanted to be doing with my life when I was your guys' age. And again, it's okay if you don't know what you want to do yet. But I definitely did. Is it possible for sharks to fight? Yeah, sharks fight all the time. Sometimes they fight over food. Sometimes they fight over access to mates. But some species of sharks are relatively solitary, so they don't encounter other members of their species except when they're mating. And that sort of reduces the chance of conflict. Let's see. How many teeth does a shark have? So it varies enormously by species. There are some species of sharks, again, that are just massive, the size of school buses. There's some species of sharks that are about that big. But a commonly cited statistic, and sharks also keep regrowing new teeth their whole lives. Many of you are some of the younger students watching today may be at the point now where you're starting to lose some teeth, and then your adult teeth grow in. But if you lose your adult teeth, nothing new grows in after that. Sharks regrow teeth constantly throughout their whole lives. And some species of sharks can go through tens of thousands of teeth during the course of their life. So someone asked me once, not as part of this discussion, but another similar discussion, if shark tooth necklaces that you can sometimes see for sale at aquariums or at stores or things like that, if they're bad for sharks. They're not, because sharks just go through so many teeth in their life. And those teeth weren't taken from alive sharks. They were found on the beach or sometimes at the bottom of a shark tank at the aquarium. So yeah, if sharks were to lose their teeth, they wouldn't be able to eat and then they would die. So it's important that they grow teeth constantly throughout their whole lives. A question from Josh, where did I get my hat? I don't even know. This one was a gift. I have a lot of shark stuff, as you might find hard to believe. If you want to see examples of it, on Instagram, I've started a hashtag Elasmo swag that documents some shark fashion. Elasmo is elasmobranch, which is the scientific name of sharks and their relatives, and swag, of course, meaning fashion. This is obviously quite swaggy. So hashtag Elasmo swag on Instagram if you want to see lots of examples of awesome shark clothes like this. Question from Nicole: how can baby sharks be born without a male? Yeah, the mom shark is just able to sort of make herself pregnant, and the babies, instead of being a mix of the genetic material of a mom and a dad, it's just an exact clone of the female, exact clone of the mom. Question from Kenyon: how many species of sharks swim in schools versus how many are solitary? Most are solitary. There are a few species of sharks that are known to swim in schools. One of those is the scalloped hammerhead shark. There used to be a bunch of giant schools of scalloped hammerhead sharks around the world in regular places. Now there's only 2 or 3 that we know of because we've just killed all the scalloped hammerheads. But in the Galapagos is where the most spectacular one that's still around is, and you may have seen videos of this, and it's on Planet Earth and things like that. But it's just hundreds and hundreds of hammerheads, some of them up to 12, 15 feet long. But most species of sharks are solitary. There are occasional times when they get together for mating events or for migration or for feeding. If anyone lives in Florida or knows anyone that lives in Florida, this time of year there's a big migration of blacktip sharks off the southeast coast of Florida, where you can see from airplanes just tens of thousands of them cruising right off the beach, and people swimming right off the beach not knowing they're there. But they are migrating all as one group, following a food source. There are also temporary, what are called pulse events of food at some places around the world, and large groups of sharks will aggregate around those. But for the most part, most shark species are solitary. Question from Creekside Elementary: do sharks eat birds? Absolutely, they do. There are some seabirds, like albatrosses. There's a really cool National Geographic video that I think is available on YouTube of just dozens and dozens of tiger sharks hanging out right off the coast of where baby albatrosses are being born. And when the baby albatrosses successfully fly, when they're learning to fly, then the tiger sharks can't get them. But a lot of them are not very good at flying yet, and they fly a little bit and pop into the water and then just get slipped up by tiger sharks. Actually, a friend of mine was on a tiger shark research expedition, and a tiger shark, they brought it onto the boat, and it just vomited all over him, just head to toe, in tiger shark vomit. And he looked down, and there were a bunch of weird little feathers all over him. And he collected them and analyzed them and determined that sharks are eating a species of bird that we didn't previously know they were eating. They're the types of bird, they're called passerine birds, which are the birds that you would find in your backyard. And we don't know how they got out over the ocean where a tiger shark could get them, but they were probably caught in a storm and just blown out to sea, and then sharks ate them. Is the great white shark the strongest shark? So the great white shark is the 3rd largest species of shark. The largest is 3rd or 4th, depending on which source you're using. The largest is the whale shark. They only eat plankton. They filter feed like big whales. The 2nd largest is the basking shark. They also only eat plankton. They filter feed like the big whales. And the great whites are the largest predatory shark, so they are quite strong. But bull sharks actually have a stronger bite force than great whites. Bull sharks are able to bite the shell of a sea turtle in half. They're able to bite a dolphin in half. They're just incredibly strong bite force. But in terms of muscle mass, that would probably be the mako, that fastest swimmer. But great whites are very strong because if you've ever seen on Shark Week or Planet Earth or something like that, the great whites jumping out of the water, trying to hit a seal really hard from below, to move a 20-foot long predator that fast that it shoots 10, 15, 20 feet high out of the water, that takes a lot of muscle mass. So they're pretty strong. But most shark species are stronger than you. The animal that we worked the most with during my PhD was the nurse shark. And they're often thought of as a pretty calm, docile, relaxed species of shark. It would take 5 of my college student interns to safely restrain one, and even so, they were getting flopped around. So they are actually quite strong animals. A question from Zeke. What happens if you flip a shark over? So this is what's called tonic immobility, is the fancy science word for it. Basically, if you flip a shark over, it falls asleep. And that's actually, people do that. Some scientists and some aquariums do that so that they can perform research or medical procedures on the sharks without hurting it. But there are also some people that do it just because they think it's funny to see a shark fall asleep. It's quite stressful to the animal, so you shouldn't do it if it's not necessary. But humans actually have this same tonic immobility reflex. If you've ever heard of someone who was badly hurt and they described that they couldn't move their arms and legs and they couldn't talk, but they were aware of everything that was happening around them, that's tonic immobility. That's the same thing that happens with sharks when you flip them over. Do sharks have noses? A question from Nicole. Yes, they have a very powerful sense of smell, and they have nostrils that are called nares. That are, if you look at a picture of a shark, they're very large nostrils compared to what we have, and it lets a large amount of water flow in, so that helps them smell things in pretty low concentrations. Another question from Nicole: was Megalodon real or just made up? It absolutely was real. There was a 50-foot long version, or close relative of a great white shark that ate whales that used to live in the oceans. You can see models of them at aquariums and science museums. But the idea that Megalodon is still around and still swimming in the ocean, that is made up. They are definitely extinct. There have not been Megalodons in millions of years, but they definitely were real. They did used to exist, for sure. What are the names of some extinct sharks? From Alicia. So Megalodon is probably the most famous one, but there are a lot of really weird extinct sharks out there. The Smithsonian website has a great mock-up of what they used to look like, and some of them are just bonkers, wild shapes. And there's one that had basically a rotating chainsaw blade in its lower jaw. We're still not sure exactly how that works, but it's a pretty cool feature. There are some that had extra fins that we don't really know what they were for. There's some that have teeth that are just really, really bizarre in shape. Can sharks see in color? Some can. In fact, there are some species of sharks that can see into the ultraviolet range that we can't see. So that, imagine there are colors that human eyes can't see. If you have a special camera, it can detect them, but human eyes can't see them. Some shark species can't see them. Sharks can also see better in low light conditions and better in murky conditions than we can. Their eyes are adapted for that. And they can also see better in very clear water than we can. So what that means is if you're in the water and you look around and you definitely can't see a shark, that does not mean that sharks are not there, and that does not mean that sharks can't see you at the moment. Question coming in now. What do you think about the stigma surrounding sharks? Question coming in now. What do you think about the stigma surrounding sharks, like in media such as Jaws or Meg? So Jaws is some of you may be too young to have seen Jaws. Jaws is a horror movie, a scary movie where the shark is the bad guy. And it was really the first major Hollywood summer blockbuster movie. So it's a very culturally important movie, and it's an excellent movie. but it's the information about sharks that's in that movie is just wrong. That movie claims that there's one shark and it was just bad and it stalked a resort town for weeks and just picked off people because it was mean. Sharks don't do that. And it would be fine if a movie said something that wasn't true, except people really believe that it's true. People are very concerned about shark bites, and when you ask them why, they talk about, oh, I saw it in Jaws. But Jaws is a fictional movie; it's not real. But people in the policy arena where I spend some of my time, we actually have a real thing that's called the Jaws effect, and that's when there's a shark bite anywhere in the world, local politicians want to do something to avoid being seen as the mayor in Jaws that didn't do anything after a shark bite. So the movie influenced real life policy in a way that's not good for sharks. But Jaws is absolutely a great movie, and I'm not against movies taking a few liberties with the truth. The problem is when people think that it's real and base real life behavior based on something they saw in a fictional movie. A question from Nicole: how long does it take for a shark to have a baby? It varies. Again, there are some sharks that have live birth. There are some sharks that lay eggs. And how long they're pregnant varies. But in some cases, the record is up to 3 years. And that's a shark species that they're probably in the water right outside my window here. But I'm getting photobombed by a pigeon again. That's the Pacific spiny dogfish shark. They can be pregnant for up to 3 years. So I will remind folks that to please keep questions coming in. We're starting to run out of questions, and I think you guys have me until for another 15 minutes here. What is the biggest stereotype about sharks? A question from Alicia. So it used to be that people thought that sharks were big and scary and deadly killing machines, and that the only good shark was a dead shark. But years and years and years of public education efforts, this is less of a problem now. Now we've sort of swung too far in the other direction. And I told you earlier that many species of sharks are in trouble. Now people believe that all species of sharks are in trouble. And that's not true, and it doesn't help anything to exaggerate. There are absolutely some species of sharks that are threatened with extinction and need to be protected. But there are some species of sharks that are not threatened with extinction, and focusing our limited resources on protecting those species isn't necessary and does not help. So I work on some sustainable fisheries that target sharks here, but there are people who want to protect the ocean and want to help sharks who believe that there's no such thing as a sustainable shark fishery, and we need to ban all fishing everywhere, and there should be no fishing, and people shouldn't eat seafood, and that it's not necessary. The science doesn't support a position that extreme. So we have a question from Kenyon here. If humans don't stop killing sharks, when will sharks go extinct? So it varies. Again, 24% of species of sharks and their relatives are threatened with extinction, which means that if something isn't done, they probably will go extinct in the not too distant future. There are different categories of threatened. There's critically endangered, there's endangered, and there's vulnerable. The critically endangered species, we could be talking about going extinct within a decade or more, or a little more. The endangered species are in serious trouble, but they're not going extinct anytime soon. The vulnerable species are almost in serious trouble. So we're not talking, the total loss of all sharks is not something that's seriously being considered right now. We're not there yet. But there are some critically endangered species that are absolutely in serious trouble. Question from, is there a species of shark that does not have babies? I mean, a species that doesn't have babies wouldn't last very long, but there are some that lay eggs and some that have live birth. How much does a shark weigh? It can be just tons and tons. It depends on the species. The dwarf lantern shark, the species that's that big, you can lift it up with 2 fingers. A whale shark weighs as much as a school bus. So it varies hugely based on the size of the animal. But keep in mind they live in water, and if you've ever been swimming, you know that you don't seem to weigh as much when you're in the water. The water provides buoyant support not only to your outsides, but to your insides. So big sharks that live in the water, they have the buoyant support of the water that helps keep their body functional. So when fishermen take the shark out of the water and they don't have that anymore, it can crush their internal organs and cause a great deal of damage, even if the shark is released. Why do sharks have more than one row of teeth? They typically only use one row of teeth at a time, but again, they're constantly regrowing teeth throughout their lifetime, because if they break a tooth, they can't go to the dentist and get a fake one or get a new one put in. So they need teeth in order to eat. So the shark teeth replacement system is sort of like a conveyor belt with another row of teeth coming forward all the time. So this can appear as, if you ever look at shark jaws, some aquariums or science museums, or maybe your school has one, you can see that there are rows of teeth, but only one of them is the front one is sort of in position to actually eat. The others are smaller and a little farther back, and then smaller still and a little farther back still. They grow that way, and it moves sort of like a conveyor belt. Do sharks eat people? No. Sometimes sharks do bite people. We believe that that's a case of mistaken identity, where the shark did not know what we were. One of the groups of people that are most commonly bitten by sharks are surfers. Great white sharks eat seals. And a surfer who is riding on a surfboard designed to cut through the water just like a seal, and wearing a black rubber wetsuit that's designed to keep a human warm just like a seal. From below, it looks an awful lot like a seal. So we think the great white shark just thought it was a seal, bit the person, immediately realized it was not a seal, and swam off. There's very rarely a second bite. I often see advice on what to do if a shark is biting you, how to fight it off. You don't need to fight it off. They're going to realize you're not food and swim away. But again, that happens very, 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 very rarely. But sharks do not eat. They do sometimes accidentally bite people. And again, very, 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 very rarely. In fact, more people in a typical year are bitten by other people on the New York City subway than are bitten by sharks in the whole world. So it's just not something you need to worry about. Someone's heading out. Okay, I think we're just about done here. So if anyone else needs to go, that's fine. But I'll answer these last few questions. A question from Kenyon: What is the longest shark ever to live? I'm not sure if you mean the species that's been around the longest. I'm not sure, but hammerheads are some of the newest shark species to evolve. But if you're talking about the oldest shark, oldest individual, Greenland sharks, which live in the Canadian Arctic, among other places, they can live to be over 400 years old. They don't finish puberty until they're 150 years old. And also they eat polar bears and they eat reindeer. This is just a super cool animal. And they would be the longest lived vertebrate animal in the world if these numbers are true. There are whales that can live to be 200 years old or so. Greenland sharks can live more than twice that amount of time. So a final call for last few questions here. I'll answer these and then I'll let everyone let everyone get on with their days. How long do sharks live with their mothers? For no time at all. A shark is born and immediately swims away and may never see its mother again. Yeah, fish, not all fish, but most fish don't have any kind of maternal care at all. It's just a lot. So what that means is a shark, the second it's born, it needs to be totally self-sufficient. It needs to be able to swim on its own. It needs to be able to hunt on its own. It needs to be able to fight off predators on its own as soon as it's born. So that means it takes a lot more energy per baby for the mother to create babies that are that self-sufficient. And that's why sharks don't have as many babies as something like a salmon or a tuna, which just spawn. Any final questions here? Okay, I think that's it then. If anybody has any future questions, feel free to follow me on social media at Why Sharks Matter, all one word. I have a Facebook fan page. I have a Twitter account. I have an Instagram. I am always happy to answer any questions that anyone has about sharks. Thank you, everyone, for your questions today. Thanks for tuning in, And have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.